Do you ever find yourself talking back to a podcast, eager to join the conversation? Our listeners tell us that they often do just that, and today we're going to hear what some of them have to say. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I am Molly Stevens, and today I am here with Andrea Nguyen, Kristin Donnelly, and Kate Leahy. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Molly.
Hello. Hey, Molly.
This is kind of a big deal today.
Episode 100.
100.
We made it.
Does this make us centenarians?
It's crazy.
In the podcast world, do you age in dog years?
I don't know. Dog years.
It's cool.
It is cool.
It's pretty awesome.
It totally is. Yeah. It's mostly you, the three of you, so I appreciate your doggedness to get us to 100. My goodness.
And so much is motivated by our listeners, I think. I think that's why we keep going, because we get so much great feedback and so many wonderful DMs from people and emails, just how helpful the podcast has been. So thank you to you.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't run out of things like topics to cover. If anything, we just keep getting more ideas. So that's also a great sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just talking to someone about how it is making the podcast re-inspires me like every time, whether I'm in the interview or listening to you guys interviewing someone. There's so much to still talk about. And I love that more and more people are finding us and that our listeners are getting more and more involved. And so that's what inspired this episode is a number of listeners have DM'd us or sent us messages otherwise to say that they find themselves talking back to the podcast and like wanting to add to the conversation and either saying, yes, they agree, or maybe they don't agree, or because a lot of our listeners are also cookbook authors, established, experienced, and aspiring. And so they have their own experiences to share. So what we thought we'd do to celebrate the 100th episode was to reach out. We sent a call to action and asked our listeners what are some of their top tips, advice they'd give other aspiring cookbook authors. And so we thought we'd start off today by reading some of those. So who wants to start off?
I'll take the first one. This one came in from Amisha Gurbani from the Jam Lab, longtime listener, first time caller, maybe. I'm just kidding. She has a really good point, and her advice is, if you want to write a cookbook, sign up for a writing class or find some other way to hone your writing skills. I wish I had known this earlier. Writing a biweekly column for the SF Chronicle, for instance, really helped me understand how to write a captivating story. This is such good advice.
I love this.
Just, sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you start kind of doing it and you take a class and it opens up more possibilities. So this is fantastic advice.
And I think a lot of what people are often lacking if they're writing in their silo is feedback, right? So a class is a forum for that feedback. There's two parts to what she's sharing. She's sharing, one, take a class, two, about how her writing got better, writing professionally for a newspaper. And I did actually ask her about that because I was like, well, what's the order of operations there? And she was saying that she took a class and then she ended up getting her cookbook deal, writing the cookbook, and then she started writing for the newspaper. And so it's just been this long and constant road of learning and refinement and just getting better and better.
Getting the column is also something we talk about, establishing yourself, building your brand, establishing your name. So it's also getting experience writing on deadline, which is a big part of writing a cookbook. So, sure, not everybody can score a column at the San Francisco Chronicle, but there are plenty of outlets that are looking for writers. So people often talk about what comes first, being a cook or being a writer, and they go hand in hand if you really want to really write a cookbook.
We've had some cookbook writing class instructors and advisors and coaches on everything cookbooks. So there is a wealth of knowledge to be plumbed from someone like Tori Ritchie, episode 29. Who else have we had, y'all?
Diane
Jacobs, right.
Episode 15.
Yep. For cookbook writing specifically, she does, I think, 3 or 4 part class on getting started with your cookbook proposal. But I think there's value in just like a writing class as well, so like a creative nonfiction. But it doesn't always have to just be a cookbook class, because Rika Alanik, who's an agent She was in our second episode. She said this thing that's been very influential for us, which is 3 things help sell a cookbook: voice, idea, and platform. And I think sometimes the voice is lacking, and voice is a little bit intangible. And it's something that develops over time. I think it's also one of those things people, when you get feedback, people don't say the voice isn't there because it's
harsh.
Not a nice thing to hear. So in the end, if you haven't had that writing training, you might not be ready. And I think her advice is really great, that a class can be so helpful.
And I know it might have been Tori Ritchie who said you can't teach voice. And I'm not so sure I agree with that, but I do understand what she's saying. But I remember I loved episode 82. And this goes a little bit to what you were saying, Kristin, too, is that don't just study cookbooks, but study writing in general, non-food writing. And in 82, we talked about craft books for cookbook writers, but also just on writing in general.
Right.
Yeah.
My writing has improved by taking classes about fiction because I'm just learning more about how you craft a scene and how a reader will engage with that scene. And that has just kind of opened up a world of possibilities for general writing that I just didn't realize I needed to exercise those muscles. So sometimes not writing specifically about food can be really helpful, especially if you find yourself using the same words over and again and getting into a rut. Just writing about something completely different can be freeing. And then you can go back and you'll find you might be more refreshed.
Yeah. I mean, I read novels a lot, and, there's oftentimes food in novels, and you pick up the descriptors, and it's really refreshing, right? And it's energizing to think, oh my gosh, there's this other way of describing
persimmons
that do not taste like melons. They do not taste like melons.
I knew that there's a reason that was top of mind, I think.
Check out episode 82. You wonder what we're talking about. Yeah.
To her point about having this column and learning how to tell a captivating story through that, I mean, there is nothing like working with a professional editor, I've got to say, in terms of tightening and maybe helping you craft that story. So if there's a way you can take your class, get the feedback that way, and then start writing a little bit professionally, even if it's just a little bit here and there, but to get that experience working with an editor, it's only going to benefit any work you do.
Most definitely.
Good advice.
Let's go to the next person, Jameen Galea, who has an incredibly beautiful Instagram feed at Books About Food. And Jameen added, nobody cares about your idea as much as you do. Whatever your project or idea is, you gotta work to make people care too. That sounds harsh, but it's so true.
It's so true. From the get-go, I mean, this is out of the gate, nobody cares, whether it's writing your proposal or editing your project, copy editing, going through all the many layers, and marketing all the way through.
Totally selling, and I always think people go, oh, it's about my passion. I was like, it's more about passion, man. You got to be obsessed with it. You got to really dig into it, live it, be scared of it,
Yep.
Fear is one of the operative words in my life. So,
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
I mean, it's part of it is the creation of a book, right? From idea to seeding it, and then also to making other people as interested about it as you do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just good enough to say, oh yeah, people know about me and they're just gonna buy my book. It's no. Mm-mm. We're distracted 24/7 now.
Yeah, it's so true. Just the competition for attention is.
And also, I think I go back to our, episode 1, Should You Write a Cookbook? This connects to that because if we've talked about this, if you can't get behind this idea, this concept for the long run, it might not be for you. And there are times I think in my own projects where I've been oh God, I'm sick of it, right? Or I'm tired of it. And that's the real work, because then you have to dig extra deep and still care about it. You can't stop caring about it at any point. You can take little breaks.
You can take little breaks.
You must love it like a child.
I will say this too. Sometimes people think that they have to be in love with their project the entire process. And I think that's not true, because sometimes you might be so excited about it and you start out with so much energy. And then you hit roadblocks and you go, oh my God, you dip.
There's a name for it. It's called the dip.
The dip. Well, and I think it's sometimes the quality is not correlated to your emotions at that moment of working on it. So you have to really commit to this long-term relationship with this idea. So no wonder, not only do you have to care about it so much, you have to care about it even when you don't want to care about it.
Right. Well, as I was going to say, when you said you might not love it, there's definitely times when I have not been in love with, but I still have to care about it because it's my job.
Right.
It's my livelihood. It's my, it's everything. It's tough.
I was thinking about this in the context of like, let's say a publisher comes up with an idea and is seeking an author for it. In that case, just to play devil's advocate, I guess I was like, in that case, does the author need to be the one who cares the most, or can the caring be spread out among the publisher and the sales team?
Doesn't that depend on the amount of money, you guys?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
But then we know that the money's never like enough money.
Right. Every once in a while, a publisher comes to you with an idea. There's this gut feeling of like, can I live with this for a year and a half?
Yeah, you don't know. Or I always think like when people come and ask me to pitch in to help with a book project, I go, well, can I do it justice? Can I really contribute something? And sometimes it's yes. I mean, there has to be, interesting for you. Or sometimes you just do it, if it's like a short-term gig. Yeah. But it may not always work out that way. So, yeah, caring is important.
Yeah. He phrases it, you gotta work to make people care too, which I think is an interesting way to phrase it. And to me, that comes down to enthusiasm. And it's like, especially, let's say the work is done, you've gone through your dip and you're back up. It's like at the end, that work to make people care. That can be challenging for authors because it is getting into that more marketing space.
Right. The perpetual self-promotion.
Yeah. If you can think of it as like promoting the idea or loving the idea so much instead of it being like about yourself, if that makes you uncomfortable, that can be helpful.
Yeah. I think the first part of it stands that nobody's going to care as much as you do.
My husband says that to me all the time.
Yeah. So we set our own standards for, how we want our careers to go, I think.
Yeah. And it is lonely, which is why it's important to get with a community of people because you can validate what you're doing and also help you figure out ways getting that feedback, like what you were saying, Kate, about like taking a class, and having that sense of momentum, because this work is so lonely.
Right.
When you're in your kitchen, when you're at your keyboard. Your editor may not be there, your publisher, if there's one, may not be there, but you have to really shoulder, and it's a marathon to get to the end.
It is a marathon.
And here's the secret. Most people don't make it to the end. So the people who make it to the end, it says something. That's the thing. It is a marathon. The career is a marathon because you not only have to care about that idea when you're working on it, you have to care about it. I'm delighted when a book I wrote 10 years ago pops up and people are still cooking from it and it's on Instagram. And it's just a really awesome feeling.
Right. Yeah. Which goes back to something, and it kind of relates to this advice. And it's something I think we talked about before, that you may be tired of the project, you're done with it, but there's still people who haven't heard about it. You can perpetually generate new interest in it.
I actually saw this marketing thing recently that was like, people think marketing is saying 100 different things once when actually it's saying one thing 100 times or something, something along those lines.
Right. Right.
It's like, that's how you have to be so excited about your book's message. Of course, you can always like tweak the storytelling a little bit to keep it interesting for yourself.
Yeah,
but
I mean, so long as you make a good book and you're proud of it and you sell it, people will return to it, because I never thought I'd have this career for as long as I have. And people who come back and say, I know you from your first book. And it's like, you do?
That's so cool.
It seems so long ago.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
I know. I have somebody discovered my first book, and it was a younger person. They were like 8 years old when I wrote it.
Oh,
yeah.
And now they're in their 20s and learning to cook. And I'm like, that's just so cool. That's so cool. Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. So from Paula Forbes, our good friend over at Stain Page News, Paula has done an episode with us, episode 18. Paula has some good advice. It's 3 parts. So 1, get all your recipe testing done first, then go back to write head notes and intros. 2, set aside pub day for running point on social media. It will take up so much more time than you think. 3, good photography is worth every penny. It's funny, that first one about getting your recipe testing done first and going back to write the head notes and intros. I do not work that linearly.
I do not.
I feel like sometimes I know exactly what I want to say in the head note, even when I'm starting on paper. I might edit it after that. But how about you?
You know, it's interesting. I'm kind of pushing myself to work that way this summer, but I still want something down for a head note, a placeholder, bullet points, something there, because it makes me nervous if it's just a blank space above the recipe. And then also sometimes you want those notes in there that help you execute the recipe better. But because I'm trying to just get immersed in a project, I feel that if I spend too much time fiddling with the language, I'm not going to be in the kitchen. Things are going to change in those head notes. So I'm really I'm veering now to this idea that Paula has put forward of just get in there and test those recipes. So, sometimes you just need volume before then you can go back and see what you're actually working with.
I go back and forth. Every single one of my recipes in my manuscript before they are tested has a head note and has notes, because I'm offering my testers food or techniques that they're unfamiliar with. So I need to give them some background information so that they have an enriching experience.
Right, because a lot of your head notes are explaining something that happens in the recipe.
Exactly.
I'm working with a tester now where some of the recipes I've given her have head notes and others don't. And she's kind of bummed when she has a recipe without a head note, because she's like, oh, I feel like part of this is the storytelling and the just understanding why it's important. And without that information, it feels a little bit empty, or she doesn't enjoy the process as much. Thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And the head notes my cell, and I need to, and going back to what Jameen said, nobody cares about your idea as much as you do. Nobody cares about that recipe as much as you do. Mm-hmm. And your head note is why that recipe is worth caring about. Mm-hmm. And so I write that head note because I'm saying to myself, this is why it matters. In my books, every recipe is there for a reason.
For a reason. Yeah. I feel like to justify that reason for a recipe being there, even just to have a sketch of a head note is helpful.
Yeah. And then I also ask my testers, well, did I under-promise or over-promise? Was I BSing you? And then they're going to tell me that. So all of those things, I'm presenting them like this little art experience almost. Mm-hmm. And it's a performance art experience, and they're there to judge it. Kind of like how, Molly, you have your grading system.
Right. But I think I was thinking a lot about this advice from Paula, that it's all about your spreadsheet, right? Your project management, how you're doing this. And for each recipe, you need to develop it, you need to test it, you need to write a head note. You might need to write introduction, other sidebar, I'm not sure. She says head notes and intros. Maybe those are chapter intros, I'm not sure. But you just need to figure out the process that works for you. Mm-hmm. So certainly, I'm not going to edit my head notes until things are tested and we're to that point. But I am the same way. I want to get something down. Mm-hmm. But I think it really depends on what kind of writer you are and how you work. And if you're holding up your process because you haven't gotten these head notes written, well, then maybe it does work for you to get things tested, to have a stack of the recipes are going in the book. And then you go back and you put on your head note writing cap as opposed to your recipe development cap. So to me, it's more figuring out what works for you as a writer, as a cookbook author, because there's our very different skill sets, being in the kitchen and developing and then sitting at your computer. And I think we tend to be more of doing the head notes first.
What I like to do too is when I'm writing a book, that spreadsheet that has all your, progress materials, it has a list of all your recipes, but it also has, intro, pantry, all the kinds of other elements you need. Sometimes you're working on a recipe and you realize something needs to be said in the ingredients section at the front of the book on this particular ingredient. And I can just then go and make a note. So I feel like I never work linearly on a project. Same. I have, intro notes, and then the intro is probably not finalized till the very end. But sometimes you don't know what the intro needs to be until you finish the entire book. And it varies each project. And especially when you're working, as I mostly often am working with another person, then my method always has to sort of change depending on the other person and what works well for them. But I would be fascinated at hearing from somebody who did the intro and then the pantry and then the recipes. I mean, it sounds very organized.
It's too organized. It's like, they're front to back, full manuscript. No, I
don't even know
that.
if that's what she's saying, but yeah, it does sound like she gets like a stack of recipes that are nice and tested and then writes those head notes. Yeah. Efficiency wise, that sounds amazing.
It really does.
Maybe it would work like if you were to hand off the recipe testing to a professional tester who was just literally going through it. And I say that because when I've written recipes for Food and Wine magazine, they'll say, well, you can just send in the recipe and we'll test them and you can write the head notes later. But I always send everything in together because I know they're going to come back with questions, right? And I'm just going to be like, no, I just covered that in my little tiny head note here for you.
Here, I have a question, actually, a question for Paula, because I wonder if what she means is that she herself is in her kitchen testing these recipes before she writes the head notes. That makes a lot of sense.
It could be that too.
Yeah.
And maybe she's not talking about that cross-testing process.
That's what I'm thinking.
Even then, I'm not that linear. Sometimes the recipe starts in the kitchen and is not yet on paper. But if for some reason I start a recipe on paper, sometimes I write the head note because I know exactly why I want it to exist.
I have a question about introductions, like general introduction to the book, not so much pantry, but just I have had my editors in the past really push me to not wait until the end to write that. And of course, I usually do. But I've found when I start it mid-process and then just sort of keep working on it a little bit, it's a better experience and it ends up being a better introduction. And I just wonder if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I often have an introduction in the proposal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And people always push back, like, well, how can I write the introduction? I should do that at the end after I've been through it. And I'm like, you will revise it.
Right.
But there's always a draft in a proposal.
Yeah, the introduction for me always begins with the proposal's project overview. So whether I'm working alone or with someone else, the cell's right there.
Right.
It's like, why does this thing exist? What's in it? You know,
what are you going to learn from it?
What are you going to learn from it?
Yeah.
That should be in your proposal. If it isn't, my friends, you're going to have a hard time selling that idea and making people care about it.
Right.
I love the full circle.
Yeah.
I think the other two pieces of advice from her maybe are slightly less like controversial. Set up pub day for running point on social media. It will take more time than you think. That sounds pretty accurate.
100%. Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Very smart.
And like the whole 2 weeks or a whole week, it's like, that's just your full-time job.
And then good photography is worth every penny. I mean, I think it is from a creative standpoint, and for the book financially, from a business point of view, I have no idea. I mean, that's always the gamble, right?
Yeah. It's one of those things where I'm curious to see if we will see more development in illustrated books that do not have photography. It doesn't seem like there's a huge groundswell for that, because every single time you look on Amazon, you look at cookbook reviews, and they always say, I wish there was a photo for every recipe, even though we know that it's really expensive to have a photo for every recipe. And some recipes don't really need it, but it's true. People like photos. And I'm thinking of that one cookbook, The Mediterranean Dish. There is a photo for every recipe. That cookbook is selling so well. She has a very popular blog, website of recipes, but the cookbook has a photo for every dish, and people love it because it makes it like, okay, I know where I'm aiming for.
We'll definitely be having an episode about this.
Back to kind of echoing what Kate was saying, I think it's an area I really want to keep an eye on, because I just think the economics of books are so challenging, and cool stuff is happening around illustrations. And I know some covers are starting to move a little bit more open to illustrated covers. And I'm just curious if we'll see some pushback against every dish having photography.
Yeah, it's definitely something I want to keep an eye on. I do take Paula's point where good photography is worth every penny. I mean, I think what she's saying there is like, you pay professionals and you pay them well. And I don't want to say you always get what you pay for, but a skilled professional, that costs a certain amount of money, and that will show in the final product.
Yeah, I think that is much more in the spirit of this advice, that
Agree.
if you're not a skilled photographer, just taking pictures on your phone and putting them there big, no. It's worth every penny to hire a skilled professional, no matter how many photos are going to end up in the book. So I think that's really the spirit. Thanks for pointing that out, Kristin.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Everything Cookbooks, but it does take resources to make it happen, and we'd like to invite you, our loyal listeners, to help us keep the lights on. To support the show, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you can find links to any upcoming insider events where we go even further behind the scenes of our cookbook publishing world. You can also leave us a review, order books through our affiliate page, check out our t-shirts and sweatshirts and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. Every little bit of support really helps the show keep going. Thanks for listening.
This is from Robin Beckett Curry, who reviewed cookbooks for the Philadelphia Inquirer for years. And there are 2 points. One, use multiple editors. And then the second one is have testers make your recipes in their homes with their equipment to see if recipes work for home cooks.
What does she mean by multiple editors? Because I mean, like we have our main editors and then a copy editor. Do you think Robin means more than that?
I'm curious.
Because sometimes proofreader and production editor might also be under that umbrella.
But if you're an author with a traditional publisher, do you have much say over how many editors you get? I mean,
Not really, unless you hire, like some people do hire their own like separate editor in addition to whoever the publisher provides. And I guess also if you're thinking about self-publishing,
yes,
and you have those choices to make, having a developmental editor, meaning somebody who is helping you shape the whole thing, having a line editor who's helping you improve things at the sentence level, and then having a copy editor. Those are like 3 different roles. Sometimes there could be an overlap among those roles, but I think all parts of that process are important.
And then the proofreader.
And then a proofreader, of course. Yeah, because, changes get input manually.
But at the end of the line, you, the author, are also an editor.
Yes.
Yes. Let's hope. Not everybody will be.
Not everyone, yeah. But I mean, like self-editing is a skill that comes over time.
Worth developing.
People teach whole classes on how to edit yourself.
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
In your writing class, yes.
Cool.
Yeah. I've been told I'm a very good, self-editor, but then what does that mean? I think is that like self-censorship or something?
I feel like it makes me a slow writer because if I'm always in an editing part of my brain, it's really hard to write. So you have to kind of, I found, okay, this is a little off topic. I'll make it quick, but there's one author had this really great system where she separates the editor from the writer by the hours of the day. So in the morning, she will write and then she has to wait. She'll do other things, work on other projects, whatever. And then in the late afternoon, then she's an editor. But she does not allow herself to do that when she's writing in the morning. And that is her like 2-pronged process for writing.
Wow.
That's smart.
That's smart.
And then have testers make your recipes in their homes with their equipment to see if the recipes work for home cook.
Always.
For sure.
For sure.
We've definitely talked a lot about that.
Always. Yep.
Always.
Yep.
With like regular equipment, not like super fancy,
restaurant equipment.
Race car stoves,
my gosh,
every single burner is like 18,000 BTUs.
Right.
Yeah. No bueno.
Yeah, it's so true.
So this one comes from another longtime listener, Rachel Riggs. Her Instagram handle is Food Phenom. This is really sound advice too. She says, plan on it being 50 times harder than you can imagine. Just accept it and dig in. So cookbook writing is always harder than it seems on paper. You look at a finished cookbook and you say, yeah, I can do that. And then you start doing it. And I guess this goes back to the whole marathon idea. Some people will make it to the first 10 miles and then they'll end up fizzling out because, you get to mile 15 and you think I'm done. And then you get the copy edits, right, Andrea? And then you got another.
That's the hill.
That's like, then you got another 5 miles and you're still not even done with the marathon. And then you get the proofreading and then you still, and then then the book comes out and then you got the promotion. And now we're probably like at mile, 24 of the marathon. And then, all of a sudden you realize it's an ultra marathon and you got to keep going after you hit the 26 mark.
And Kate, you're only talking about production. Like you're talking about you have the deal, you're making your book. Yeah. Because I know Rachel has had a hard time even selling her book, which she did do successfully, and it will be coming out next year. But that is like a whole other part of the challenge that comes before you even get to the writing of the book.
And that goes back to nobody cares about your idea as much as you do. So you have to really, really care.
You do. I mean,
I love that she's quantified. It's 50
I
times.
love it.
As soon as I read this, I was like, yep, it is.
Yeah. Those are, I have a feeling Rachel may have some statistics on that. And Lord knows it took me years to place my first book. So
And I also would say that I didn't realize, I thought once I wrote one book, the second one, I'm like, oh, I got this. No, still 50 times harder than I thought. It was just a different kind of
I think it's
hard.
easier. I do think it's easier after going through once, but yeah, it's always shifting. And then
it's always hard for different reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are new challenges. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So here's something from Charlotte Druckman. Her piece of advice was really interesting. She said, be very wary of signing 2 book deals, especially for first-time authors.
Which to me, it was like a hot take.
Right. Because if you're a first-time author, you get a 2-book deal. You're like, woohoo, I'm rolling, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then Charlotte's point was that financially, if you're a first-time author, you're probably getting a modest advance. And if your first book deal goes well, you're selling well, you'll be able to ask for more money for the second book. But if you already locked yourself into a 2-book deal, you'll probably get the same amount for both books. So the house is kind of betting on you in a particular kind of average way, I think is what she's saying. So for a first-time person out, it maybe seem like, oh, it's manna raining from publishing heaven, but it doesn't work out so well. I've never gotten a 2-book deal, so I have no idea.
I've never gotten a 2-book deal, but I certainly, like with my first book, if it had been a 2-book deal, I got a very low advance for my first book because I was an unknown first-time author. And that book did better than anybody thought it would. And so when I went back to propose for a second book, my agent could ask for more money than they ever would have if I had signed a 2-book deal.
It is conceivable that you can get like a fairly big advance because a lot of times if they're signing a 2-book deal, it's because they have a lot of like faith in this author. So it actually might still be, at least on paper, what financially feels like a really good deal. So some of Charlotte's other points do make sense. Like, what if you don't like working with that publisher and then you're locked into them? What if your editor leaves mid-project? So I do see that point as well.
I wonder if you could work wiggle room into the book contract.
You mean in terms of the advance?
In terms of the editor?
Well, in terms of can we divorce after
Right.
the first project? And if you're so valuable to the house for a 2-book deal, maybe they would have, and I'm sure that there is something in these kinds of deals where there are contingencies that you can adjust things as you go.
I think this is a case-by-case basis. I would say it's also, at least for cookbooks, I think it's kind of rare for first-time authors to be given a cookbook deal that is going to encapsulate 2 books because publishers are risk adverse. And if you've never published a cookbook, you're not a proven entity. Do they really want to give you 2 books, out of the gate? Oftentimes, that second book, even if your first book sells really well, that second book, it might be topic dependent. Maybe that second book isn't as attractive and a publisher is not necessarily going to give you more money for that second book. So it really can vary and it really depends, I think, on probably goes back to, author platform. A publisher might bet on you for a 2-book deal if they think your platform is going to keep on growing quite a bit and they want to lock you in for 2 books. If your platform is not so large, getting a 2-book deal would be, I would love it if people have received 2-book deals in our community and can tell us how it went for them. But Charlotte's, points about publishers changing, editors leaving, all that is quite valid. And you can go back to the Michelle Braxton episode to listen about how she navigated changes in publishing with her one cookbook deal. If she had 2, I think that would have been challenging.
I'm actually remembering, I think Amy Thielen said that she had a 2-book deal and it's why she ended up doing a cookbook and then a memoir. And I don't know if it was pitched that way. That's also another sort of interesting thing to me because Charlotte talks about the importance of having a really solid proposal for all the books you do. It doesn't have to maybe be the full proposal, but like a lot fleshed out. Your idea feels really solid. And I could see publishers, especially if there's somebody who's like super hot, they want to lock them in, saying like, yeah, we'll give you a 2-book deal. And there's like one idea that's super great. And then it's like that second one. They might have trouble landing on that together. I could see that scenario very easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's something I think we should maybe see if we could find some people who've had 2-book deals and talk more about it because it's a very interesting setup. And Like you say, it's one thing if it's a serial, if you say, okay, I'm going to do, like I'm thinking about the series that Dara Goldstein did, The Preserved, that was very laid out. So it was a 6-book deal, but they knew exactly what they were.
It's
I think
proposed that way.
Yes. A lot of what Charlotte's talking about is, okay, we super hot about your first idea, and we'll come up with something for the second idea. And that does sound like, I'm not sure I'd sign that.
Depends how much money, if it's a lot of money.
Right. That's
depends
true.
on the money.
If it's like, $10,000 to do 2 books, that's not worth it. You'll go broke.
That's not it, as my daughter would say.
You'll go broke just on groceries, testing your recipes. So
yeah, I thought the other thing that Charlotte mentioned about the proposal was something we haven't really talked about. But if things do start to go sideways with your publisher, your relationship with your editor, and they don't like what you're doing, the manuscript, they see it halfway through, they don't like the direction it's going, or even after you've turned it in, they're not happy with it. And if you have, in fact, done what you proposed, if your proposal is solid and detailed, you could hold that up and say, this is what I said I'd do. This is what I did. This is the contract we signed. So, hopefully it won't come to that. But it's good that if you were to get in that situation, the more detailed your proposal, the more protected you would feel, or you would be
it's
legally.
total insurance and protection for you, the writer. Yeah. So anybody who's done a 2-book deal as a first-time author, we'd love to hear from you, or even like anytime. It's just like I wanted to add that there are so many years between books. For me, I've done, 2 years between books, and that just seemed like so quick for me. So 3 years is kind of like where I'm good at. But things change. The landscape changes so much that it would be hard to gauge what's happening in the space in terms of your interests. So I don't know, I would rather position things as like 1 book at a time myself.
I do wonder if that first book doesn't perform that well. Does the publisher have the option of canceling that second book?
I know in fiction they do, because I remember talking with an author who had a 3-book, like a trilogy, and the first 2 didn't do well, so they...
I think that's pretty common in sci-fi fantasy to have a 3-book deal. Yeah. And then it's like, here's another thing. If you get a multi-book deal and the advance isn't substantial, you might find that you're sort of like the Moneyball equivalent in publishing, where they're going to take a flyer on you, but they're not going to put any resources. They're not going to put marketing, publicity sort of efforts behind selling your book. So they might just think, hey, if this thing hits, great. If not, we lose basically no money. So that's something that I know that I've heard sci-fi fantasy authors, they talk about this. They're really about like, oh, this book deal, you have to write a whole series. And then your first book in the series doesn't do well and the publisher sort of buries maybe publishes the next 2, but doesn't do anything for you. I don't know if that happens in cookbooks. Right. It's different market.
That is something Charlotte said in her detailed explanation why. She said if your first book doesn't do well, the publisher won't get behind your second one, and then you're on your own for publicizing it, but you're kind of on your own.
Yeah,
anyway.
That's true.
In many ways.
Oh, why do we, it's like self-flagellation. Why do we return to this career of ours, book after book, deal after deal, you guys?
Because we love it. But this is great. I mean, this is a lot of good advice and a lot of good conversation around it. So maybe before we go, do we have any moments or advice that we've gotten from some of our amazing guests?
I'll do a quick one. I would say Lori Galvin's episode was great. She is a literary agent and a dear friend of the podcast. She kind of built on that earlier saying that Rika Alanik shared with us in episode 2. Hers, though, was the 4 Ps and 1 C of cookbook publishing. She said this is not how she sort of goes about her business, but this is what she's seen as trends in the industry. So she said the 4 Ps are platform, package, pricing, page count, and the C is celebrity. And these things are just more heightened in cookbook deals. It doesn't mean that she only works with celebrities or she only signs celebrities. She's just seeing that celebrity is sort of this ascending thing in cookbooks, and it's changing who gets book deals. Same with pricing, page count, package. Shipping costs are really expensive. I mean, you're seeing books that would have gone for $35 last year, going for $40 this year. So just a good episode to listen to, what it's like on the publishing side.
Andrea?
I was like thinking about how fun it was for us to cook with Ali Slagle.
Oh, yeah.
Even though in my kitchen I sounded like I was floating out in space. But she's so deft at what she does. We talk about how in this career, like, you're writing cookbooks and you're writing recipes and it really seems so boring, but there can just be new ways of doing things. Mm-hmm. And I think that Everything Cookbooks, what we've done here is bring together such a disparate group of people to talk about cookbooks. The cookbooks unite us, and we have different approaches, and sometimes they overlap like a Venn diagram, and sometimes they don't, right? Allie's just like, I love her work, and I was thinking about that, and what a crazy episode that was way, way back in November of 2022.
Wow, I remember that one. That was fun. Kristin?
One thing that's very interesting to me is that one of our top 10 episodes, and it's kind of been consistent for a little while, is one called On Rejection and Recovery. And I think this brings up the marathon aspect of cookbook publishing really well. And just, I think that episode is popular because it helps people feel less alone and just know that, like, even some of these most successful cookbook authors you see out there deal with a fair bit of rejection in their career. And that could be rejection because you don't sell a book. It could be rejection pitching an article, it doesn't get placed. It could also just be that feeling of rejection when you like get an edit and somebody doesn't like it. So I'm really glad we did that episode now. And it's really interesting to me that it's still so popular.
Yeah, really good point.
Sticky to talk about, but really important.
I mean, who loves it? No one loves rejection. I love rejection.
Not even George Costanza loves rejection. I mean, nobody loves rejection.
I also like our episodes on money. Money's a hard thing to talk about in general. And then in this industry, it's tricky and very opaque. I think we've added so much value and I'm so glad. But like those are two topics, rejection and money, that have that like taboo feeling that I think we handled well. And I'm glad to have put that out in the world.
I'm a little overwhelmed looking back at all 100 episodes and trying to think about highlights because I keep jumping around, and I love that we get really conceptual, but we also get very, nitty gritty, detail oriented. So I guess I'm not going to let myself off the hook. I won't.
You want to do that?
Okay. I was trying to. And so I think I'm going to land on, I think it was B. Wilson and Amy Thielen both kind of talked about it, but entering into a contract when you're writing recipes, you're writing cookbooks, you're entering into a contract with the reader. And Ali Slagle also talks about like this idea that the recipe can only get the reader so far. Like there's this space between your recipe and the reader, the cook, the user. We'll be talking about user UX, which I also think gets to this, but how we think about and address that space between the words we so carefully and painstakingly put on the page and how someone goes into their kitchen with those words and comes out with something delicious to eat, and thinking about cookbooks sort of on that level and being willing to maybe change it up. Maybe there's something else we could do. Maybe there's new ways to communicate these things. And that's just something, whether it's your craft of writing or how you're organizing the book or the style of the book. And I just love talking about that. And I love getting guests on who can talk about that and are trying to think of new ways. So it's not, it's the happy robot, the recipe speak, that all that. So that's just sort of big picture stuff I hope we can talk more about. So speaking on that note, I guess this is the end of season 5.
Yep.
Episode 100. And we're going to take a little break, summer break, but we will be busy talking and planning and scheduling more episodes with lots of great conversations and more amazing guests, we hope, and fresh ideas. And you can always find us over on Instagram. And everybody have a great summer. And thanks so much.
Thanks for hosting, Molly.
This was fun.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is available wherever you get your audio, and if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review. It really helps people find the show. Any book mentioned can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. And thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.